you will please rise for the pledge of allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Joining us tonight, just a couple of housekeeping things on the front end. There are a number of people that have joined us on online electronically, so I want to welcome them and also let them know that their comments will be recorded. And during the time that we are having a discussion about the water tower, we'll ask if there are comments from those that are online. Those that are online, if you would please type any questions you have into the chat box, and also please keep your microphones on mute during the course of our meeting. Ben, was there anything further that we need to say about those folks?
That is all. Thank you.
Very good. All right. First item of business is to consider approval of the agenda. Do we have a motion?
Motion.
Okay. Moved by Trustee Kornecki, second by Trustee McCabe to approve the agenda. Any comments or questions on this? All right. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Next is consideration of the minutes. This is for the regular village board meeting for January 24th. Do we have a motion?
I'll second.
Moved by Trustee Leaker, second by Trustee Owens to approve the minutes. Any questions on this? All right, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Next, approval of the treasurer's report. Do we have a treasurer's report tonight?
There is not.
Next then is approval of the payment of the bills. Do we have a motion?
I'll make a motion to approve the bills.
I'll second.
Moved by Trustee McCabe, second by Trustee Owens to approve payment of the bills. Any questions on any of those? All right, all those in favor say aye. Any opposed? All right, next item is citizens' comments. We invite you to make comments on any item that is not on the agenda for tonight's meeting. If you want to make comments, we ask that you approach the microphone here, give us your name and your address, and if you would please limit your comments to 3 minutes. Are there any citizens' comments on non-agenda items? All right, hearing none, we'll continue on. Next item is President's comments. I just have a very quick report to read into the record. This is the activity report for the Sheriff's Department during the month of January. During the month, they had 101 911 calls, 264 officer-initiated contacts. They had 92 phone calls for a total of 457 during the month. They issued 51 citations and made 8 arrests during the month, so 59 total arrests in January. There is a full and complete detailed report of the sheriff's activity in the clerk's office if anybody should wish to see that. And that is it for me. We'll go on to trustees' comments. Trustee McCabe.
It's good to see people in the audience. That's all I have for now.
All right. Trustee Kornecki.
It's good to see people in the audience, and I'm happy to be here.
All right. Trustee Owens.
Welcome to everyone. Thanks for coming.
Trustee Leaker. All right. Very good. Next item then is to move on to administrator's report for discussion and answering questions regarding the water tower. First, what we're going to do here is we're going to hear a presentation from Ben Wood, who is with Strand, our advisor on this issue. We will open it up to additional comments from the audience. Just to give you a little bit on the ground rules for that, the board may or may not respond to any comments or questions that you might have about the water tower issue. We also will ask the same thing about that we would do with citizens' comments, and that is to have you come up to the podium, give us your name and address, and also limit your comments to 3 minutes or less. I will allow just about any comments related to the issue. However, we don't really want to hear repetitive comments. So if there's something new to say, that's perfectly fine, but if you could please limit your comments to things that we haven't heard already. And with that, I will turn it over to Ben Wood.
All right. Thank you. I'm just going to make sure that we're all set to roll here. Thank you, everybody, for coming out tonight. Obviously, your attendance just underscores how important this issue is to everybody. I have received some of the comments that the school board has received, and they've found their way back to me. My name is Ben Wood from Strand. I'm the project engineer for this water tower project. And I have about a 20-minute presentation that I'm going to go through here, and then we will open it up for questions. So here are the list of frequent concerns, and I understand that some folks grabbed a copy of this presentation on their way into the room, and that a PDF of it has been circulated also. We intend to, as the president said, I'm kind of recording this presentation also, and that'll be made available after the meeting at some point. But here are the kind of most frequent questions that have come through from the school board, through the village and back to me. So I want to take some time and address all of these in the order that they are shown here. First, why does the village need a new water tower? As most folks know from seeing the existing water tower, that needs repair. That's one side of it. Another side of it is that the village's water supply system needs additional fire flow capacity available to it. So I make reference throughout the presentation to ISO, which stands for the Insurance Service Office, is an organization that goes to communities all across the nation, and they actually show up and they test fire hydrants and they review water infrastructure to see what the water mains and pumps and towers are capable of doing as far as providing fire flow goes. They also, in the area of those tests, they look at the building occupancy type and construction type to say kind of a target how much fire protection is needed at this location, and then they do flow tests to see how much is available. So they come through about every 10 years. The last time they came through the village of Bristol was in 2018, and they determined that there are a handful of sites here in the main part of the village, which is utility district number 1, that need a fire flow rate of 3,500 gallons per minute for a total of 3 hours. So the existing water tower is 100,000 gallons, and if you do the math, it cannot support that. So looking at a 3-hour duration, the existing tower could support 550 gallons a minute. If you look at trying to deliver that target flow rate of 3,500 gallons per minute, it could do that for a total of 25 minutes before it would go empty. And with the wells running, it could do that for a total of 40 minutes. So that is a deficiency. That kind of prompts naturally the next question. Why now? Why did the village defer maintenance on the existing water tower? The village has been deferring maintenance for some time. They've known that additional storage is needed, and there's been a plan in place for how a new water tower would be paid for, and it has a lot to do with impact fees from new development as they build in this part of the village. They pay connection or tap fees that help pay off the capital costs for a new water tower. Obviously, well, not obviously, that plan has been in the works since, prior to the 2008 housing recession. And obviously it's, the housing market's been down, there's not been as much development, so the village wanted to kind of wait for that development to come around and provide the funding source to do it. DNR regulates water tower maintenance, so some of the comments have been, like, why would we build a new water tower? The village is just going to let that one go too. To that I say the DNR regulates water tower maintenance. They come through the village and they do what they call a sanitary survey once every 3 years. And what they do is they actually have their field representative come review all of the water supply facilities in the village. So they monitor these things, and when they believe that it gets to a point that it's in need of repair, then they kind of issue a citation to the village. So what they did in their most recent sanitary survey, which was done in 2020,
is in their summary report, they listed this as a deficiency and gave the village the order to correct that deficiency by December 31st of 2022. So the village was waiting for either the development or the other hand, which happened to fall here in this situation, was that the regulators said, okay, you've deferred it enough, it's time to do something. Now the village has known for a while that, again, there's not enough storage here, and when the village's hand was forced to do something, they would build a new water tower with more capacity.
Ben, excuse me 1 second.
Sure.
I think you skipped the scope and function.
Oh, forgive me. Okay, thank you, Mike. Function and scope of the water tower project. This is just intended to give kind of a baseline understanding of the style of water tower that's proposed here. This style is called a single pedestal because it kind of sits on one peg, so to speak. And it's got a big ball on the top that holds all of the water. So the water tower controls the well pumps and absorbs pressure shocks. So if you folks are familiar at all with a house that has a private well, for example, there's a pressure tank in the basement. That pressure tank absorbs changes in pressure, and it also serves, there's a high and a low pressure set point. When that tank reaches the low point, the well pump kicks on. When it reaches the high point, the well pump kicks off. Exact same thing happens here, except the pressure tank, really, the shock absorber is the water tower. It's open to atmosphere so that water tower level can rise and fall. As the pumps kick on initially, there's a shock of energy that kind of goes into the system. The water tower helps absorb that. It's also designed, there's a lot that goes to having this storage elevated. It pressurizes the system, which makes sure that there's always, even under an emergency, DNR minimum is 20 PSI pressure in all the water mains. And that's to make sure if there was ever a leak in the pipe, water would go out and contamination would not migrate back in. The water tower maintains the pressure when the wells are off. So there are 3 wells in the village. If they were out of service for maintenance, or if there was a power outage or anything else, just the energy that's stored by having the water in that elevated state provides enough pressure to keep all of the pressure in the pipes. The water tower volume absorbs spike in water use as well due to hot days or firefighting. So again, in contrast with the existing water tower that's only 100,000 gallons, in a matter of minutes, that volume could be depleted during a fire. With this, it's going to store a lot of water so that even if the fire department is on the scene and they're using a lot of water, there will still be enough water for other folks in the system to use that. The village is planning to do 2 water towers here. So 1 new, and they are planning to repaint the existing water tower. The reason for that is that 2 towers allow for adequate pressure when one of them is offline for routine maintenance. So every 5 years, DNR requires that all water storage facilities be inspected. So if one of those towers is offline for a complete drain down inspection, if there's only 1 water tower in the system, then the utility has to pay to bring in a very large pressure tank, usually on a semi-trailer or something like that, to hook up to the system with air compressors to kind of help pressurize the system. 2 water towers eliminates the need for doing that. Obviously, the new 500,000 gallon tower would provide the bulk of the storage volume in the village, but that other one also serves that useful purpose of adding redundancy so that if one of them is down for maintenance for some reason, the other one is still there to pressurize the system. So then lastly here, as stated, the village's plan is to build a 500,000 gallon water tower first. Once that is built, then the existing tower can be taken offline drained and be repainted before being put back into service. Now, I put in parentheses here that that's adequate for full system build out. What that means is we, during our preliminary study here, got in touch with the village's planner, took a look at the 2050 land use plan and looked at all of the development that is projected for the year 2050 and even a little bit beyond that. And we made sure that volume of water is going to be adequate for essentially full growth of this part of the village. All right, did that slide, so just want to double check. Okay, why the school property instead of the industrial park? So large diameter mains help move water across the system. Think of this in terms of roads, right? So interstate highways move a large volume of traffic very quickly. One lane gravel roads, not so much. It's very similar in a water system. So 12 and 16-inch mains are considered large transmission mains that are in place to get water in large volumes across the system very quickly, so that when the fire department is fighting a fire, they have that water pressure and volume when they need it. So the school site already has 16-inch water mains. Those were invested in because the school site was historically planned for a water tower. The village actually, I know this is probably hard for those to see in the back of the room, but there's a pink line here in the bottom of each of these graphics. That's a 16-inch water main, and it starts on the east end at US 45, and it kind of wraps all around the west side of the village. And the intent there was that as development continues to happen on the northwestern portion of the village, that transmission main would be expanded, much like a bypass around a city, for if we're back to our roadway analogy. And then all the smaller mains are kind of tapped off of that. So having the water tower on this 16-inch main helps move water around the system very, very quickly. Now, shown here in the graphic is that the school currently only has 16-inch water mains. And you can see my two icons of a fire hydrant up toward the top of the page there. And those are the hydrants that the ISO actually came out and opened up to test how much water supply was available. And they found 1,900 gallons per minute available. Now, they targeted 5,000 gallons per minute for this site, again, based on occupancy. Obviously, it's a school, so it's got a high occupancy, and the construction type. So ISO was looking for a maximum of 5,000 gallons per minute as a target. I put in parentheses here that 3,500 gallons per minute is kind of max credit. The insurance service office kind of rates the water system, and then insurance agencies turn to ISO. Based on that rating, they use that to set insurance rates. So it's kind of an indicator of how well a grade of insurance that the school can get. So basically, even though ISO is looking for 5,000 gallons per minute, 3,500 gallons per minute is kind of the max credit that they give out. When we're designing a system, we look for actually getting to that location. Anything over 3,500 gallons per minute, we're saying that we're doing really well. So placing the tower close to the school improves, there would be new hydrants installed on the east and west sides of the school, and those would get over 4,000 gallons per minute of fire flow capacity. So why the school property instead of the industrial park? Shown here in these graphics, the two on the right are images of where the tower would be located in the industrial site. You can kind of see a teal blue line going through each of those two figures. That's new 12-inch water main, new 12-inch diameter transmission main that would have to be installed in the industrial park to get that water tower location tied back into the 16-inch mains that are on AH already. So right now in the industrial park, there are only 8-inch and 6-inch mains. And if we put the 500,000 gallon water tower there, those 6 and 8-inch mains aren't large enough to get the water out into the rest of the system quickly enough. And consequently, when we do our water system model, the fire flow rates, the flow rates available are not as high when we do it when we site it in the industrial park, unless we also do a lot of new 12-inch water main installation. So the second bullet point here indicates the industrial park site requires anywhere between $575,000 to $1.1 million of extra kind of site costs, and that's that additional water main in order to get the water tower connected into the rest of the system. The range in that number all depends on how much mains actually go on the ground. We would recommend that the water tower get looped into the system. So if there was a break on one end or they needed to close a valve on one end for some reason, the water can work its way around. You could do an option where there's just one water main to it, but then if there's ever a problem on that water main, then you're kind of hamstringing the system's ability to move that water until that issue is resolved. The school site would still, even if the water tower was in the industrial park, the school site would still need those additional water main improvements that I've circled here in red on the image in the lower left in order to have that fire capacity improved to that threshold that ISO is looking for. So even if the water tower goes in the industrial park and all of the money is spent that we suggested or called for in water main improvements, it still doesn't fix that in and of itself, doesn't fix the fire capacity issue at the school. There would still need to be water main improvements at the school site to improve that situation. Why weren't the school water mains installed in the past? The current water study that we're doing as part of this design revealed the need for the water main extensions to increase the fire protection at the school. So the reason why we undertook the effort of doing the study now is the water tower is intended to serve the system for full build out, and water towers are often in service for 60 to 80 years, if not longer. So when looking at putting in that kind of a life cycle of a project, now was an appropriate time to do the study. It was not done at the time of past school additions. So the village typically requires water main extensions. If it's new development, the developer has to pay for the extensions so that they have adequate water supply to their new development. In the case of this, the school expansions, they were not reviewed with the same level of scrutiny as a new development was, and the water mains were not required to be put in at the time. Now, I will state that ordinances require the property owner to pay for the water main extensions as they traverse that particular property. In hindsight, the village should have required these water main extensions at the time of the past school additions. And I guess just spelling it out to tie these thoughts together, if the village moves ahead with putting the water tower at the school site, some of those water main improvements that benefit the school would be done as part of the water tower project costs. If the water tower goes in the industrial park and the school district wants to move ahead and improve the fire protection, they'll have to pay for those water main extensions on their own. What is the aesthetic impact? Of course, this is probably the #1 concern that's been passed along through those of you who have voiced the concern. So I put together a number of renderings. Now, just a couple notes on this. Most trees and landscaping are not shown. This was put together in a software program called InfoWorks, and all it does is it takes kind of a two-dimensional aerial photo and it applies it to ground contours and topography. And that's why in some of these images, you kind of see a distorted image just based on the perspective of the model. So trees and landscaping are kind of manually added. So of course, we didn't go through the effort of adding all the trees. Tree height and type are approximate. Buildings are auto-generated based on the footprint of a house, and the heights are also estimated as well. So if we have not rendered your particular property correctly, please know it was just to provide a general visualization of what this might look like. On your way in tonight, behind where the agendas were located, there's this same index map, and we're going to walk through a couple of, well, over a dozen of these locations so you can see where they're at. And then there's a little red arrow down in the corner, same with the printouts, so you can kind of see where we're at here and the perspective of where we're looking. So in this first one, it's in the school parking lot on the south side of the school. That's what the water tower would look like. Number 2 is on US 45, looking west down AH. Chaucer Woods is on the left, and the school property obviously on the right. And again, I'll just reiterate, every single one of these is on the boards in the back if you want to take a closer look at a location nearest you. You can feel free to take a look. This is kind of midway up the block. It's actually kind of on the southwest end of these ball diamonds, kind of halfway up 203rd, between AH and 83rd, looking back southeast toward the water tower. This is property on 45. The address, approximate address is shown, whose backyard kind of backs up to, there's some wetlands and some woods, and then the water tower behind that. This perspective is from their driveway that leads to the garage in the back of the house. Next up is, we're kind of on the east entrance of Chaucer Woods. So this would be at that intersection, the westernmost house, looking back toward the water tower. Next one is across the street to that, to the west. This perspective is kind of on the side of the house. So if there's any windows on the side of the house and you were looking out the window, this is what you would see. Again, all tree, I'm not sure what type of landscaping and stuff is there, so I apologize, but I just wanted to give a perspective, at least, of what the water tower itself might look like. This here, we're moving, if you came into Chaucer Woods east and you started to head south and kind of make your way around the horseshoe, this is about 3 houses in on the east side of the road. This is kind of like a front stoop perspective if you were looking back toward the water tower. Same view, a couple more houses down. The reason I wanted to pick out these views in particular is just obviously as you kind of turn around the horseshoe here, you're going to lose vision of the water tower. So I want to make sure to give an idea for the various folks who are going to have the most direct view of it, so you had an understanding of what that would look like. This is about midway through the horseshoe, and this is actually in the backyard of a house. So it would be on the north side of Chaucer Circle. Again, not all trees shown, and obviously you can kind of see that distorted aerial image in the foreground of this, but this is kind of a backyard perspective. What would this look like? And that would be kind of typical for all the properties on the north side of the horseshoe there. We're still at the midpoint in that horseshoe, but kind of in the front yard across the street. Again, these building heights are approximate. They're probably not quite that tall, but the point here is you'll see the water tower kind of between the houses, but if there's a house blocking your particular view, you might not see it. As we continue to move around the horn, we're getting toward the west side of the circle here. Again, the point here is that you can notice that the water tower is getting further and further off on the horizon. And depending on your perspective, you may see it around or behind some of the houses. And in some cases, you won't see it much at all. This is kind of in Chaucer Place. Again, I know that's not representative of the actual landscaping there, but just you can get a feel for that what that would look like. And then this is a house kind of on Chaucer Place, but toward the west intersection, or Chaucer Circle West intersection here with AH, so you could see what the water tower would look like if you use that entrance to the subdivision. Next up is at the intersection of 203rd and AH. We're looking back east. And then the next several pictures are intended to give a perspective of what the water tower impact would be to those in the Bristol Woods subdivision. So this is the farthest south end of 204th Court, kind of at the circle, looking in between the houses back toward the water tower. Again, I believe there's a row of trees even between the back of these houses and AH that isn't shown, but you can get an idea of the scale of the water tower there. This is in the exact same location, but instead of being in the front toward the driveway of the houses on the east side of 204th Court, this is kind of in the driveway of a house just across the circle on the other end. So you can even see in this perspective, the water tower is kind of very much obscured behind a tree, giving the indication that those folks won't have very much of an impact. This is moving up 204th Circle, a little bit further north. There's another cul-de-sac. This is an idea of what the water tower would look like from that perspective. And looks like that was the last one. So Randy, the village administrator, did reach out to an appraiser that the village uses, and it's his quote. So I'm just going to read it verbatim, if you bear with me here, because obviously a big question here is what will the water tower do to my property value? So Mark's quote here is, "I am not aware of any specific situations or studies in Wisconsin regarding residential values being lowered due to a water tower having been placed in mainly residential development areas. Water towers can be found anywhere in a community, and there are many municipalities in the state that have them in residential areas based on the need to do so. In many of these communities, the water tower serves as a nameplate with the town, village, or city name placed on them to help identify a location, or they bear a local mascot from the school or community. As a member of the International Association of Assessing Officers, I checked their research library and found only one study from Texas in 2017 regarding the impact of water towers on residential property values. The general conclusion from the report was similar to my observations over the last 17 years, in that properties located near water towers show no discernible difference in value than those not located near one. In some instances, the values increase because properties now have access to water, more pressure, etc." Next question, what is the water rate difference if the water tower were built elsewhere? I'm going to answer that question in two slides, and this first slide kind of steps through the capital cost, and then the second slide will step through what that means as far as water rate impact goes. So first off, water rates in Wisconsin are regulated by a state agency known as the Public Service Commission. They view water utilities as a monopoly and therefore kind of take it upon themselves to scrutinize all the financial decisions of the water utility. They regulate water rates. The village, even before it does this water tower project, has to get construction authorization from them. And we have to go through this process of reviewing what the impact on water rates will be as a result of the project. So as part of construction authorization, they require a rough preliminary rate calculation. So the cost to build a new water tower and repaint the existing tower is a fixed cost, and that's about $3.15 million combined. The difference between the two sites is obviously the water main costs and the site work cost for each of those. So for the industrial site, It's let's just call it 1.1 million to 1.65 million of extra water main costs, but that does not include those water main loops at the school property to improve their fire flow. That's just the 12-inch mains that get the water tower connected back into that 16-inch backbone. The school site has $450,000 worth of costs. The difference there is that 16-inch pipe is right there at the site that the village would like to use, and therefore they can kind of use some of that money to loop another $250,000 of water main kind of up AH as part of the school site costs, and we'll call that $450,000 total. So that leads to a total cost opinion for the industrial site of 4.7, school site 3.6, a difference of about $1.1 million. So what does that mean for rates? So rates should be considered indefinite. Realistically, it could be a 20 to 30 year time frame that'll have to be paid for through the rates to pay off the initial financing. But the Public Service Commission also requires that the village account for depreciation of the water tower in the water rates. So they make you kind of store up money so that someday when you need to replace that water tower or do a maintenance project on it, that money is kind of built in. So this should really be considered as applicable for the entire life of the water tower. So the current average residence is about $36 per quarter. That would be about 70 gallons per day, 2.5 people per house, leads to about 6,000 gallons per quarter of water use. The industrial sites, plugging in all the numbers, PSC has a little calculator on their website, would lead to a 160% rate increase. So that same water bill would jump up to $93.60 per quarter. For the school site, $1.1 million less capital costs. There's still going to be a hefty rate increase of 122%, but it results in a quarterly water bill for the average residents of just under $80 per quarter. I will note that rough calculation assumes 100% of the project cost is paid for only in water rates. In reality, there will likely be some impact fees that are accounted for that will help to finance the water tower, so it could reduce a portion of that. But that won't really be known until we finalize what the site is, actually design it, bid it out, build it, and understand what the full costs are. And then once the project is completed, the PSC will make the village go through the full-blown calculations, audited calculations. They'll account for all the actual funding mechanisms to determine what the water rate increase will be. But you can get an idea for the order of magnitude difference between the two sites. What are some of the other benefits of the school site? The school is a customer of the Bristol water utility, and their fire flow capacity is below ISO target levels. That's kind of the problem here. That gets solved for the school in part by siting the water tower on that property. School site utilizes the benefit of past investment in large diameter mains. What I'm meaning there is the village already started building this backbone on AH of 16-inch diameter mains. Putting the water tower on that backbone just makes good use of that past investment. Siting the tower at the school saves the utility and the school money. Using those existing mains, it expands mains further to the school as part of the project cost rather than having to, if the school wanted to take that on as a special assessment or some other charge, and it keeps the water rate increase lower. Now, again, there's going to be a significant rate increase as a result of this project, but it controls that a little bit. Another question that came up is, well, won't a sprinkler system at the school kind of take care of the fire protection problem? So one issue with that is building sprinkler systems are usually fed with a private lateral that's 4 inches in diameter, some cases 6 inches in diameter, And there's only a 6-inch pipe available to the school right now. And tapping a 4 or 6-inch pipe off of a 6-inch water main, there's just not as much volume and pressure available to that private fire lateral to serve that sprinkler system. Particularly if you think about it in terms of if there is a fire at the school, the sprinkler system and the fire department are going to be competing for that same water out of that 6-inch main. So I have no idea what flow rate, for example, the sprinkler system is designed for. But let's say, the fire department already wants 3,500 gallons per minute to fight the fire, and there's only 1,900 gallons per minute available, but it's only available at 20 PSI under worst case scenario. If the sprinkler system needs a few hundred gallons per minute of that, then that's even less that's available to the fire department to fight the fire. So having a large diameter main there just helps out both the fire department and the sprinkler system. There are a couple questions about child safety, tornadoes, earthquakes, and water towers. The pictures on the right just simply demonstrate that in a couple of very large tornadoes that have happened kind of regionally, I'll say, it's very common that the water tower, especially a single pedestal tower, which is the same kind proposed here, is one of the only structures left standing. So there's a lot of safety factor built into all the structural and foundation designs of the tower. The water tower itself has no moving parts. It literally has a 12-inch water main that goes 100 feet up in the air to the big ball where the water is stored, and it's the well pumps that are off-site that control the level in that water tower. So there's no pumps or moving parts here, no associated noise. Let's see here, ladders, any ladders with this type, they're all internal. So that big diameter pedestal is part of the structure. It doesn't actually hold water. Inside that pedestal, there's ladders, there's platforms, and there's a 12-inch pipe that is inside that takes the water up to the ball. So the only way to access those ladders is through a steel door on the outside of the bottom of that pedestal, which is under lock and key, and also those have an alarm that's tied back into a central computer monitoring system. And I'll just leave it at there are earthquake factors, design factors that are taken into account, just like there are for high winds and tornadoes. Fire protection is the real safety issue. So ISO, and I know I've been kind of going through this a lot, but just to reiterate one more time, ISO indicates that the school should have 5,000 gallons per minute for 3 hours available. We're targeting 3,500 gallons per minute or more for 3 hours. The existing 6-inch mains on the north side of the school only supply 1,900 gallons per minute when the system pressure is allowed to drop to DNR minimum 20 PSI. The sprinkler system and fire department will be competing for the same limited water supply. Bristol's fire chief was consulted and concurs with the need for the new 500,000 gallon water tower. A new water tower on school property, along with new large diameter water main on 203rd Avenue, provide over 4,000 gallons per minute of fire protection to the school. Relaying 6-inch water mains near the school parking lot on 83rd Street are also recommended. What noise levels can be expected? Again, the water tower contains no pumps or moving parts. The site will be quiet like any other water tower except for initial construction. It's going to be rather disruptive with cranes, excavation, foundation systems are usually commonly 25 or more feet deep. And then water towers these days get repainted approximately every 20 to 25 years. And that's about a 2.5 to 3 month process. So those are the times that the site will be noisy, but in between and under normal operation, it'll be a pretty calm, quiet site. Will this prevent the school from expanding? So just in full disclosure, I've not talked directly with the school at all about this. We've kind of been relying on the village to be an intermediary there. So I have no knowledge of their plans for expansion, but I just laid out a couple quick graphic here to give a perspective of what might be possible. So the image in the upper left here is the same rendering that's on the index page back there, and it just kind of gives the intent here that the site here for the water tower is tucked away literally in a corner that's bounded on both the north and the east by wetlands, and which can't be disturbed anyways as part of construction. And therefore, if you look at the image in the lower left, you can kind of see a square. That's the parcel that the village is pursuing to acquire from the school district. It kind of is tucked away there, and it's kind of the lowest grade of usefulness, if I may, to the school. The larger kind of grayish purple square in the lower left there shows that there's still 8 acres of buildable area that's left over for the school on that site, even if they give 1 acre to the village for the water tower. And as far as how useful that might be, I know this is kind of silly and not practical, but the image on the right is just intended to give an order of scale of, hey, if you took the existing footprint of the school, you could fit 3 more of those on the same parcel and still have room for the water tower. You know, obviously, if you want to preserve the ball fields and that kind of thing, you could at least fit 2 more schools if they had the existing footprint. Again, just intended to give an order of magnitude. And that kind of concludes my presentation. Mike, I'll turn it back over to you if you want to open it up for either board questions or audience questions.
Sure. Let's start with the village board and ask if there are any questions. Go ahead, Trustee McKay.
You know, you're talking about the old water tower, just need to coat of paint. Is there more involved than just slapping a coat of paint on the outside of that?
Yep, so while I've not been actually hands-on it to inspect it, on the outside it needs a full sandblast down to bare metal and to be repainted. And that again is about a 2 or 3 month process that the water tower would be out of service. And then at the same time we would go, while the water tower is drained out, we would highly recommend the contractor go in and do the same thing on the interior, sandblast it down to bare metal. Now, the existing tower, my understanding is it's over 60 years old, so there are some code issues on the tank as far as adding a safety railing to the outside of the tank, adding a fail-safe and tamper-proof vent to the top of the tank, and then upgrading the ladders and fall protection equipment on the inside of the pedestal.
Questions or comments?
Where would that put our water rate statewide?
Statewide, it would be near the top. I don't have the exact figure, but I think you could safely say within kind of the top 10th percentile. It wouldn't be the most expensive, but it would be up there. I also want to state, just so everyone knows, whether this project moves forward or not, it's what's known in the industry as the replacement era, right? So a lot of these water mains, a lot of this development happened during the 40s, 50s, 60s, all kind of related to the war era. A lot of ductile iron pipes that are failing and need to be replaced, et cetera, et cetera. So the point I'm making, Bristol, like a lot of other utilities in Wisconsin, is at a point where a lot of these systems are kind of reaching the end of their useful life and will need to be replaced. And I say that because when Bristol moves forward with this project, your rates will jump up to the top 10th percentile. But then you'll notice, since all 3 wells in the village have enough capacity for full build out, you will never need, I don't want to jinx anything, but you shouldn't need a new well facility. And this tower takes care of all your storage needs. So this is kind of the last increment of major infrastructure that needs to be added to this part of the system. So initially you'll jump up to like the top 10th percentile, but then you'll notice probably 10 years later, as all these other communities are replacing their water infrastructure, et cetera, you'll drop down to the 20th, eventually the 30th percentile, et cetera, et cetera. So it's, you know, if it were a race to the top, which I know is a bad analogy, it's kind of like Bristol might stick its nose out front with higher water rates for a period of time, but then you're going to fall farther and farther back in the pack as time moves on.
How far does a building need to be built from a new water tower, from a water tower? What are setbacks?
That's a good question. Randy, do you happen to know just generically setbacks for residential districts in the village?
It depends on what the zoning district, each zoning district's different. But I would think for instance, for the water tower, it's probably going to be 100 feet setback roughly.
Sure.
So.
Okay. And if it was another, let's say it was the school that was developing normally for other, like an institutional district, I'm sure anything from 15 to 25 feet is probably standard residential, probably in that same neighborhood.
Thank you. That's a good presentation for.
Thank you.
I got one more question. Go ahead. What if we just don't do anything and leave the old water tower sitting as it is?
Yeah, that's a good question. So and it's a fair one too. So the do nothing option is you definitely have to take the existing water tower offline and do what we call that rehab, that full sandblast the inside and outside down to bare metal, repaint it, do all those code upgrades and safety upgrades to it. You're talking ballpark $350,000 to do that. And right now you've been given a date by the DNR to get that done by the end of this year. So obviously with even the decision-making process between these two sites, just in full disclosure, we're not going to make that date, but we are in communication with DNR and they know that we're making progress toward that. So the do nothing option, you still got to spend the $350,000 to do that repaint and rehab project on the existing tower. And the trick of that is, again, kind of gets at, for one, operation while that tower is out of service. You have to kind of bring in a temporary pressure tank on a, usually they're mounted on like a semi-trailer, hook it up to a fire hydrant in the system. And I know to most people it's probably not a real valid thing, but trust me, the water operators will lose a lot of sleep at night hoping that nothing breaks or nothing goes out of service, because that's the only thing maintaining pressure in the system. Pressure falls below 20 psi, then the village is mandated by DNR to issue a system-wide boil water notice, and you get into all those things. If the system were to overpressurize during that, then you can start blowing water mains apart, separating them at the joints, and water main breaks. If you're using a contractor, it can easily cost $20,000 each to fix once you include all the road work along with those. So for the 3 months that tower's offline, it's kind of, you know, you're hanging on by a thread operating your system, but many communities do that, okay? That's not to say that it can't be done and that it's not common to do. But then you shift to the other problem, and that's the real crux here, is the village has been deferring this project for a long time, just kind of waiting for whatever the trigger is, whether there's enough development to pay for it or whether the DNR comes in and says now is the time. So if you were to ask me, if I can take your question one step further, if we do nothing, when will we have to do it? I would say that kind of trigger point is in the past. The only reason that the village hasn't done the project yet is waiting for development to kind of pay some of the capital to provide some water rate relief to the rest of the customers. But the need for it has already come and gone. So you would be, you know, operating in a mode where I think you would have to consult with the fire chief to say, you know, we go back to those numbers on one of the early slides of, okay, if a fire does happen at the school, we can only provide a high rate of flow for 40 minutes, and then what? And it's kind of a discussion with the fire department on coming up with a contingency plan to handle those emergencies.
I just was going to ask about the role of the Public Service Commission and the DNR both as regulating bodies.
Sure.
Can they command the village to take action? build a new water tower?
Yes, they can. So what they have done at this point is they have not come in and said, okay, Bristol, you need a new 500,000 gallon water tower. What they have done is they said, Bristol, your existing water tower, the maintenance has been deferred enough, you have to fix the existing water tower. They don't care quite as much how useful that 100,000 gallons of storage is or is not to the system. But yes, they can force you to correct that. Now, it's not quite a situation where, hey, if the village doesn't do it, is the DNR going to come in here and hire a contractor and do it themselves? No, but and I've dealt with this before, if a water utility kind of ignores those orders from the DNR defers those to the Department of Justice, and then they kind of give you that arm of the state government to deal with. And that's not a fun situation to be in. But in general, DNR reviews the system to make sure it complies with all the technical codes and that it's going to provide minimum levels of performance. And then the Public Service Commission is kind of the other side of the scale to balance DNR out, to say, how does this get paid for in a way that is in the best interest of the ratepayers? So DNR will tell the village when there's a need, and will also submit the plans to DNR, and they'll kind of do a plan review and approve all of that with their engineers. And Public Service Commission will evaluate how it's getting paid for to see that it's getting paid for responsibly. And with that, the Public Service Commission in their review, they require the village, to do an alternatives analysis where they say, they don't just take the village at its word of, oh, you want a 500,000 gallon water tower, sure thing, here you go, here's how much it's going to cost your ratepayers. They say, what other options are available? Whether that be a ground storage facility with another booster station, whether it be an interconnect with a neighboring system to take advantage of perhaps some nearby infrastructure, which there's not in this case. If there's another style of tank construction that might be cheaper than the single pedestal kind of tank, the village had to go through all of that. And we already talked through 3 different alternatives with the Public Service Commission, and this one comes out as kind of not just the most affordable now, but on a life cycle cost basis as well.
So on that point, this discussion about a water tower has been going on for years, right?
Yeah, and Randy has more history than.
By building the larger 16-inch main.
Correct.
Into those developments west of Highway 45 was intentional, with the understanding that this ultimately needed to be done.
Yes.
And those projects go back even more than 20 years, though.
Yes.
All right. And thank you for mentioning that other alternatives were also considered. I know that our audience tonight is just seeing a lot of this for the first time. But
sure.
This discussion and consideration has been going on for a long time. And as you mentioned, the DNR and CSC both have come to some conclusion, at least about what our discussions with them have been, that this is the solution that makes the most sense for what we're trying to accomplish.
Yep.
And Mike, isn't this the 3rd or 4th presentation you've given?
Something along those lines.
Yeah, I think this is the 3rd or 4th.
All right. Randy, any comments on your side?
No.
Chief? Okay.
All
right. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
I have a question now. You said that around the school, like on 203rd and 83rd Street, that would be like $250,000 now. Is that for each street or is that total for the whole thing?
Yep, great question, and I'll go back to that slide. So if we chose if we move ahead with the school site here, this water main right here will be part of the project.
Okay, it's got 250 on whole street.
This 250 will be part of the water tower project. And that cost is already accounted for in evaluating that $1.1 million cost difference between the two sites. That includes, this one's included. However, this one is not.
Okay, is that the one the school would have to pay just the 250,000?
Yeah, and to be honest with you, the need for that one just came to light probably a month ago. As we were studying this particular site more and more. The reason for that is, you know, if you put this water main here, there's currently no water main on AH.
203rd.
Thank you. There's currently no water main on 203rd until you get up to, is this 84? 82nd. This is 83rd here.
Yeah.
But at any rate, we said this water main is needed because there's already a 12-inch loop that the village, or 12-inch stub that the village invested in the past. And then that gets you up into all these other water mains where the water can get to the rest of the system. This would take all of the hydrants on this west side of the school property and put them at a level where they can do about 4,400 gallons per minute. The village would also plan to put a tower over here a hydrant at the well site over there. That bolsters the fire protection on the west side. But since ISO was looking at these two hydrants in particular, if you wanted to solve the problem at those exact hydrants, which quite honestly, we haven't discussed with the fire department yet, if those would be the hydrants that they would want to use to fight a fire. But if you want to make sure that those hydrants also had 4,000 gallons per minute, then you would have to install this water main right here where there is none, and this little stretch, that 6-inch, relay it with a 12-inch.
Okay, so I guess the point I'm getting at is that the school site would be $1.1 million cheaper, right?
Right, to the
Okay,
utility.
So
Yep.
so does that include 250,000 or the $500,000 there in that 1.1 million?
Only the 250. So then the school,
Okay.
or at least at this point, and I will say in that cost estimate of, boy, for some reason I'm,
3.4.
yeah, the 3.4,
Yeah.
there is a 15% contingency worked in.
Okay.
Okay, so what we'd have to figure out, and this conversation has not been had with the fire department yet, it has not been had with the school district yet, but if everyone decides it's important to do that east-west water main on 83rd right out of the gate, we would have to figure out if that's something that the school pays for and gets special assessed, if it's something that the water utility absorbs into the project, if there's contingency funds available, or how that gets dealt with.
Okay. The other question I had, I guess, found these impact fees. I don't know exactly how much impact fees are in there right now. Is there not anything that can help us with this expense? If the decision is made, this is just a guess now, if the decision is made to go to the industrial park, is there not any, can those impact fees be used for that?
Yes,
Okay.
there is some. I don't know what the dollar amount is, but yes.
I don't know off the top of my head, where are those impact fees in the budget? Do you know off the top of your head? Are the general fund?
No, they're in the water utility.
Water utility? Okay, so we could use those if decisions made.
We're currently actually using most of those impact fees to pay for well number 3 that was built, or
Down by the eye?
no, the one by Bristol Bay.
Okay,
So once that well gets paid off, then those be transferred towards the tower.
okay. The other question I had now on these quarterly rates for the water, this was just like a guesstimate here because we won't know until this thing is down the road quite a ways.
Correct.
Okay, so it said $79.92 per quarter if it goes to the school. And if it goes to the industrial park, it's $93.60. So you're looking $13.68 difference. And when it gets to be that high, I know everybody's watching their budget, but,
Yep.
you know, okay.
And that is a fair argument, and I just want to say, for those water mains in the industrial park, there might be some that are wondering, well, do those need to be replaced? At one of the previous presentations, Trustee McCabe, the utility commented that there are some water main breaks out there, but they're manageable. so that tells me when we get done with our study here, we'll probably say in a long-term capital improvement plan, so like in the 10-year to 20-year time frame, when water mains are breaking enough that they need to be replaced in full, we'd probably recommend they get replaced. So I fully understand your point. When you're looking at a gosh, what is it? Almost a $60 a month, $50 or $60 a month. I'm sorry, quarter increase in your water bill. What's another 13? If you wanted to look for a silver lining in that, it kind of pulls forward a 10 to 20 year project of a water main relay somewhere else, and it just says, okay, we're going to advance that and maybe do that 10 years sooner than we otherwise would have.
The other thing I was going to ask you, there was also an tower option number 1B, extend 12-inch to Main Street and replace leaky mains. This would be on the industrial park site.
Mm-hmm.
So if that were to happen, would we have to go under Highway 45 or go over the top of it?
That's a good question. So it would kind of depend on the DOT, because the DOT owns the road. Now DOT says when we come and redo a road, you cannot open it up for another 3 years. That said, given that this is a concrete road and everything, they would probably make you just drill under it.
It's been 3 years since they did
Roughly.
It's right about there. So they'll either say no, or the village might say, you know what, it's not worth it, because the village then would have to pay for all the signage for a detour and all the traffic control as they're open cutting, or maybe they can do one lane at a time. But probably at that location, it might get drilled under the road. And then on the west side of the road, we try to put it outside the pavement altogether and just have one crossing.
Okay, because it says here that would help replace leaking pipes and also leaking mains in that area, correct?
Yeah, correct. So, that just gets back to the operator's comments that they are periodically fixing water main breaks over in the industrial park.
So I guess it would make sense to do it right the first time, and get those fixed now. If we're gonna put this money out, let's do it now instead of 5, 10 years from now, our guys are over there fixing leaks.
Yep, that's certainly
And everybody
a valid
knows we
perspective.
had leaks on 45 here even after they did this highway. So
sure.
money-wise, if you're gonna spend it, I would rather do it and go across and fix it all right first time. Let's
Sure.
not go back and dig it up again.
Sure.
Okay. Now, you mentioned 16-inch mains, but in your report, you say 12-inch, so that's gonna be sufficient on the other side of the road?
Yeah, correct. We might take another look at it, but in our first round of modeling, 12 inches was enough. And then at that point, we would rather focus on running some parallel 12-inch mains. So you kind of have that security. If one of them needs to be shut down, then you've still got another one to it. So
Because it still loops around there, even if you go on the other side of the road, like you're saying, the loop
Yeah.
is more advantageous, right?
correct.
Okay.
So the difference here is in the top figure, which is the cheaper way of doing the industrial park. It would just be, what's the shortest route to get the water main over there? If we looked at a more robust option where you're relaying some of these, where there's existing mains, where they're fixing breaks sometimes, and you just want to put it in that path and relay them, then we would recommend kind of doing a loop around the water tower.
Okay, now let's talk about the view of the tower for our
Sure.
friends in Chaucer Woods.
Yeah.
Bristol Wood. When you look at some of those pictures there, over where they're proposing to put that water tower by the school, they're gonna wipe out all those trees on that north side of the road. See where that tower's sitting on the north side of 8 there?
I do, yep.
And I can tell you right now, they're gonna clear cut all those trees there. So even though they're gonna do landscaping, that's gonna be devastating for the people that live in Chaucer Woods and have to look out their window and see this golf ball on a tee. And then all the greenery's gone.
Sure.
And you can landscape, you can plant to the cows come home, but it's not gonna be the same size as those are for years.
Yep, correct.
That's my issue.
Yeah, and I will say in that, I believe that's a valid concern, because there would definitely be some trees that get removed as part of the project.
Will there be more than some?
Right, but I also, I mean, I know that it's not all of the trees that are gonna get removed, because there's that swath of DNR wetlands up there, and the area that you can kind of tell north of the tower that's wooded right now, that probably represents about 5 acres, 4 or 5 acres. And, you know, we're touching whatever's within the 1 acre site.
That's gonna be quite a bit,
Sure.
quite a bit out.
Yep, and I'll just point out now, it's where the tower is located is not as densely wooded as it is, you know, a little bit further yet north in the woodlands. And then you can kind of see how the trees get more sporadic over that direction. So we're not touching anything outside of the 1 acre.
Right, I
And I'm not saying that we're clear cutting the 1 acre either.
I'll bet you $50 they do.
I'm gonna leave,
I'm thinking that.
we'll leave 1 tree there just so I win the bet.
Yeah.
No, you may be right, because we haven't gotten that far along in actually designing the site. And one thing that I'll point out is, that kind of supports your position, is when they paint these water towers, they actually hang a shroud. So they have literally a cloth curtain that surrounds the entire water tower, and it's maybe hangs out 15 feet wider than the widest point of the tower. And that allows them room to work underneath of that. So they have to have a clear area that's about 15 feet greater radius, or 30-foot greater diameter than the tower itself.
Trees.
Yep.
Well, I'm not sure there's enough, because the setback has to be how far from the road, Randy? Did you know off the top of your head?
I don't know, off the top of my head.
It's shown, just so you know where it's shown right now, it's about 50 feet off of the road.
And boy, you're gonna be right in the middle of those trees. Okay. I just think the industrial site would be a better site, because we had issues over there with breakages, and you're mentioning leaks in there. And I can see spending all this money to do this, and then a year later, oh gee, now we gotta go across the road and extend it across, and so we can fix these leaks.
Yep. And just to respond to that, and to be fair, because I'm sure there's a lot of folks that hold a similar position and a similar opinion, I can hope that you would at least understand, when we launch into these things, we want to find the most cost-effective way to completely solve the problem.
Right.
And hey, there's an opportunity to save $1 million here up front, which is definitely worth looking into, and obviously more than that, because we've been pursuing this site. But it's not to say that, hey, if folks decide, or if the board makes a reversal of their decision, or the school board doesn't make the property available, the other site is an option, and it will work, and we can make that work. And it might be, you know, to most people's concern and yours, you know, aesthetically, it's not going to have the same impact or resistance from the businesses over there, but it's going to cost more. So folks just need to understand there's a trade-off, and it ends up going that way. We'll be content with that, and we can design it and make it work,
No,
et
and I
cetera.
appreciate that, because
Yep.
that's why we hire you, to give us which one's least expensive, which one's the most expensive, and then let the chips
Sure.
fall where they may, and that's your job.
Sure.
You're supposed to do that. You'd be upset if you didn't.
All right.
You know, but I just think it's really unfair to subject those residents after they did that, so. All right, we'll see where it goes. Any other questions? Now people are waiting here. And I think that's all I've got so far. But
Okay.
thank you very much.
So one of the concerns is located not far on the stick there, but if we twisted that view just a little bit, don't you see one to the right down that street?
Yeah, I know what you mean, and it's not shown here, but yeah, so if you take the distance that the water tower is from 204th, almost equal distance to that on the other side, there's a water tower. That's where the existing water tower is.
So all the people on the east side of Chelmsford Woods could look out their windows and see the water tower.
Again, we didn't model that, but I know you're trying to make a point, but I can't answer that.
I mean, I'm guessing that's where the Chaucer Woods people look out their window and see the water tower. There's not, I'm just putting it out there, that it's not like they're not looking at the wrong.
Well, but I think it's a difference of looking out your window right across the street as compared to one that's way down over here, and there's buildings there that kind of hide it, and there's trees over there that kind of hide it. To me, there's a big difference between having it from here to there than from here all the way down to D. You know, I mean, I don't know.
No, I just want to point out that, I believe there's one already in there.
All right, any last questions from the board? We're gonna open it up to public comment. All right, so as I said at the beginning of the meeting, we will certainly allow comments from the public. Let me just get an understanding though of how many of you wish to speak on this issue. If you would please raise your hand. So just a half a dozen or so. Okay, I just needed to get an understanding about what we're looking at here for discussion purposes. Okay, we'll start with you in the front. If you want to step up, give us your name and address. And if you would please limit your comments to 3 minutes.
My name is Rod Vivian. I live at 8652 Joshua Circle. So it's about halfway around the circle there. Yes, I won't see it as bad as the east side. But my question is, as you go from 250,000 to 500,000 for that area, how do you get up to $3.5 million to do the whole project then?
Sure, good question. I'm gonna, just so I make sure I use all the right numbers, I'm gonna go back to this slide here. So the third bullet here shows that the water tower cost, and that's the cost to build the 500,000 gallon tower and to rehab the existing 100,000 gallon tower, that's 3.15 million of it right there. And then we're saying there's another $450,000.
Let's stop for a second. On the other page, you show $250,000 for the water tower. And
Those are just for mains. Those are not for the tower. The 250,000 that you're referring to.
Yeah. I'd be happy to.
well, one of them points to the tower.
Yeah, if it does, that's a mistake on my part, but those two, the slide that shows the red circles and the $250,000, that's this one.
You have one that's clear, a slide that's clearer than this. Keep going.
First one. But to your point, it's $250,000 for the water main, not for the water tower. The water tower, the sunk cost in the water tower, no matter where it's at, is 3.15.
So with that kind of cost, why aren't we looking at federal or state grants to help pay for the cost instead of passing it all off to the residents in the village in this area?
So those are options, but we've got to pick a site first and know what costs we're going after. Through the state, DNR has an environmental loan fund, state revolving loan fund that they call the Safe Drinking Water Loan. So the village does intend to apply for that. They're working with their municipal finance advisor, which is Ellers. And then again, that's all kind of under the regulation of PSC. So they will definitely be pursuing those. And it's a matter of picking a site so we know which cost to go after funding for.
I can tell you right now, I'm not interested in being the highest one in the state of Wisconsin.
Oh, sure.
Just because, you know, it's a nice thing to have. And I feel that there's other options. Being a contractor, you know, historically, you know, there are ways of cutting costs for the residents of Bristol and not having to pay $50 to $60 more than we currently pay per quart. And where we live in Chaucer Woods, our subdivision is one of the higher taxed areas. And, you know, to add more money on just because it's closer to us, you know, I think that there has to be other ways to, you know, keep those costs down.
Yeah, and just to be fair, it's not just Chaucer Woods that would pay higher water rates.
Well, I
It's
understand.
everyone in the whole village. It's not just you.
Yeah, are we talking about, from C down to the state line and from, I forget where it is, west, but all the way out to the interstate?
So it's everyone within Utility District 1, which kind of serves this kind of traditional core area of the village. So parts of the village that are over by State Highway 50 and the interstate, for example, that's part of UD3. Utility District 3, they pay a different water rate. The part of town where the new industrial and business park developments are, they're part of UD5. That's a different thing altogether. And PSC regulates that so that everyone in those utility districts are fairly paying for their costs. And they will not, the way that they run those accounting, the way that they stipulate that you set it up, they actually won't let you pay for this through taxes. So to that point, the only way that a taxpayer ends up paying for this would be if the village pursued a special assessment, which I can tell you they've never mentioned to me that they're interested in doing that. By funding it through the water utility only, then it's the water customers that are paying for that.
And I'm not saying, you know, funded by taxes, I'm just saying that, you know, as one of the higher taxed areas, adding an additional cost of, you know, $60, $70 more without, you know, trying to get some other funding is, I think that we can, here in the village, we can try to, you know, find those resources to help in that cost.
Yeah, and again, the water rate increase that was shown assumes that 100% of the cost is funded through rates. Let's say you took a fourth of it and said that was paid for by impact fees, et cetera. You know, you're still looking at overall water rate increase of 100%. So I think in all practical scenarios, it's fair for every water rate payer in the village to know that water rates are going to close to double or more.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Thank you. Who else wanted to speak? Go ahead.
Scott Blasi, 8506 Chaucer Circle. Could you pull up, I think it's number 6 on your houses in our neighborhood?
Yeah, sure. Thank you for.
So I want to answer, you're talking about Carolyn and Chris about, is it the same looking as the one that's a half a mile down the road, or that one? That's the view from my backyard. And those trees, you know, you're right, it's not what my backyard looks like, but I'm gonna see this monstrosity that's 500,000 gallons, 200 feet or less, it sounds like, if it's only a 50-foot setback from my backyard. So besides this site and the industrial site, which it's an industrial area, I think people can agree that's going to be not looking like that in our backyard. It's an industrial site. There's other buildings there, people go to work there, fine. Has any other sites been looked at?
Besides these two, no.
Why?
Primarily the village, having gone through this exercise before, they actually already owned the industrial site, and we were given the directive, hey, do the design, put it in the industrial park. And then when we did the water model to look at, hey, does this actually solve the problem of the fire flow? And we saw that it didn't. We said, hey, I know this is gonna come as a surprise, but you actually need another $1 million worth of water main just to get this tied in. Do you have another site along existing large diameter water main? And that's when it came to light that, hey, yeah, actually historically for 20 years, we've been planning on doing this at the school site because there's 16-inch mains. And we kind of pressed that and said, is that a foregone conclusion? Is it too late to reconsider that? Because I'm not sure that decision was made knowing that of all the other water main costs. So that's kind of what led to us being here.
What about other sites in the school? I mean, could this be pushed back towards the school? I mean, you're gonna have big cost, of course, for the, for the running the line all the way back.
Sure.
That's ridiculous. I mean, this thing is, it's 200 feet from my yard.
Yep.
And it's not gonna just see that little bit. We're gonna see the whole thing. Nobody's impacted more on this site from a view standpoint than me and my neighbor across the street. I can't agree with you more. It's an eyesore. I mean, yeah, it's a brand new tower. It is 500,000 gallons of water, 200 feet from my backyard. And it makes a huge difference whether I'm looking at that and my neighbors are looking at that and the one that's across the street, half a mile away in the industrial park. For $60 more a year for water, I mean, I know everybody's tight, budgets are tough, families are struggling, but everybody in Chaucer Woods that I know is vehemently opposed to this site because it's so close to our home. Industrial park, completely different site, completely different view. It's just, obviously I don't want it in my backyard. And I agree with you, the trees are gonna get cut down. And when we moved to Bristol, it's a beautiful community, it's a rural community. To put this thing 150 feet, 200 feet from my yard and other yards and everybody else in Chaucer Woods and the folks that are impacted in Chaucer Circle, you really have to look at putting this in the industrial site, if we need it. And I think you did a great job on the presentation. It sounds like this is inevitable. We're gonna have to do something with the water in this community, but just can't put it in a residential site like that. I appreciate it, appreciate your time. I'd ask that you vote against this site and put it in the industrial park, and I'd ask anybody here from the school district and the school board to not give this property to Bristol and keep it for the school. So, thank you.
Thank you. Come on up.
Hi, I'm Christina Argersinger, 8667 Chaucer Woods West. I just have a question. It's been said over and over that this site has been historically planned. If that is the case, why did you then zone Chaucer Woods to be residential? If you had the thought that you were going to put a water tower on school property, you've made no move to buy that property. You've made no move in these 20 years to own that property, and you zoned us residential. I think a lot of our neighbors would not have moved there if they had driven around and saw a water tower there. We thought we were buying across the street from the school.
Okay. Thanks.
Beatrice Desiree Young, 8411 207th Avenue, Bristol. So I'm seeing the illustrations here for the first time, and I know there's been talks about this for years, which I have to admit I'm not really that familiar. But I just want to say that this is really an eyesore, especially people from coming in from other, like from Illinois to take a look at this in Bristol. It's bad enough that we have the gun range or the shooting range hearing, we hear it on a Sunday morning already. So it just seems that the planning, this is not the first time that a village is growing or a town has grown. So why wasn't this considered when we were expanding and planning to grow Bristol? And another thing is, I am seeing this for the first time. Why aren't we seeing illustrations in the industrial park? Or have we already made up our mind to have it here? So.
Yeah, I guess to answer the latter part of that question, these were made in response to all of the complaints that were forwarded on from the school district. These were not, we weren't planning on doing this until those complaints arose. So that's why it's specific to the school site.
Well, I mean, and it's like, you know, there's dangers of living next to a water, like this. I'd like to see illustrations of where it could be in the industry park, for example. I mean, there's gotta be some objective kind of decision made. It feels like this is the decision and that's it. I'm not too happy with that. There's a lot of hygiene issues next to a water, living next to a water tower like this. Bacteria, fungi, possibilities of it falling down. I don't know, a tornado could come. This is 8 million pounds or something like that. That's kind of dangerous, especially for the school, for kids. I think there's, you know, protecting the community and kids is priceless. And I think that I'd like to see illustrations of how this would look like in the industrial park. And also the costs, and is there any other options? Like, for example, to absorb the costs? Because this is coming to a surprise to all of us. So I don't think that we should be held accountable for these costs. And in addition, the other point I wanted to say was, yeah, I forgot, I guess, that's it. But you get the point. This is kind of, I'm not too happy with this. Oh, the other point is there has to be other options, like for example, well water or some kind of ground storage. I mean, I'd like to think about that.
Sure.
And see more options in that respect.
Sure. And that last point is a question that has been raised since this presentation was distributed to some of the folks in the, presumably the HOA representatives from each neighborhood. You know, what about a ground level reservoir? So part of what DNR regulates relative to those is that the reservoir has to be above the level of groundwater. Because when you have something at ground elevation, it's not pressurized like the water pressurizes it when it's up in the tower. So it has to be above the ground the groundwater level, so that contamination from the groundwater can't seep into the potable water reservoir. So therefore, when you do these at a ground level, you're normally looking at a structure with a 20-foot depth, and only about 10 feet of that can be below ground, and the other 10 feet has to be above ground. And it's a much larger footprint than a water tower is, because instead of having that kind of in a sphere, you're orienting that into a shape of a rectangle. So there would still have to be, there would undoubtedly be, in that case, more tree loss, and you would have a larger structure there, at least from a horizontal perspective to look at. Obviously, it would only be 10 feet tall, not 110 feet tall, but there would still be something there.
So in other words, it would not be municipal water anymore, it would be, or well water options? I mean, I'm not an engineer, I don't know, but
Sure.
I think that there could be other options provided at this point. That's all I have to say, that's all I have to say.
Okay, thank you.
Hi, Pen Tab, 18709 102nd Street in Bristol. If you could clarify for me, is the Mango subdivision part of the UD one?
It is, but it doesn't have water. It's only sewer.
Right, but we just received like our last water bill, and on there was a pretty large increase, about the $80 increase that had occurred on our bill. And we realized that there's some work going on with the forced water main at this point, but that too is going to be expanding. And just a lot of the neighbors in our area were really, really taken by surprise with the increase in water bill. And then we thought maybe it was because in part of this water tower, but then there's also this forced main. I just would like to make sure that like we address the forced main and how that's going to affect our bill in the future as well. Because there's a lot of very concerned residents over there that have approached me because I'm on the lake board and they've asked me. So I would just like to make sure that that is like, you know, taken into consideration.
Two separate issues. That's sanitary sewer force main. and they've been leaking, and the DNR required us to replace those. That is the reason the rates went up in your sewer bill to pay for, it's $2 million to replace the force mains. So,
Right, is that reviewed like last November?
yeah, I don't remember the time frame, but yeah,
November, we went with-
yeah. The village board rates, approved the rates, the village board approved the documents, that we did for bidding the documents to replace the force mains. We bid the documents, low bidder was approved. Matter of fact, the work should be done in about 2 months.
Yeah, no, I was just like hearing some of these numbers, it was just kind of like frightening me, as a homeowner
Sure.
over there too, so, because ours did go up pretty significantly with that.
And you know what would help also, is a lot of this stuff happens, like we talked about the force mains were biting last November. We've had 3 or 4 meetings on this water tower already. So we need the audience to participate. This is the first time we really had a lot of people show up. So in order to get information from the village, if you can sign up on our website, there's a link on there, and every time we do a board meeting or a planning commission, we send all the information out the email to you, so you can see what's going on, so you can be prepared and come back and say, oh, why are you guys doing this, or what's going on, and you can give us more input early, so we can get a better feel of how people want to do stuff. If we would have known back 6 months ago when this was on the agenda, the school, nobody likes the school, maybe we wouldn't have the engineers spend all that money on it. So we do need the help from everybody, especially when we put on the agenda. You know, we gotta get help on this stuff.
Hi, Doug Knoll, 20610 83rd Place in Bristol. So the first thing I wanted to ask about would be, can you clarify that the increase, regardless of the industrial site or the school site, will be based on usage? Is that what I was hearing?
Yeah, that's a good question. So on your water bill every quarter, there's a set minimum amount that you get charged, and that's called a meter charge that you pay no matter how much water you use. And then on top of that, you pay based on how much you use. So yeah, if someone, this is just kind of based on a middle of the road, 6,000 gallons kind of bill. If you used, let's say 4,000 gallons, it doesn't necessarily mean that your water bill would be 33% less, because everyone's still got that minimum charge in there, but it would definitely be less. And if you use more, it would definitely be more.
Okay, so it is based on usage, the increase. Okay, thanks for clarifying that. So then, based on what I'm seeing here, and I think you had alluded to it, Carolyn, around the about approximately $13 more. I mean, that boils down to like $4.50 a month. That's like a cup of coffee, right? Let's give your Starbucks for a month. Let's put it in the industrial site. I think it's a no-brainer from that perspective. The other thing I wanted to mention is that there's a couple of petitions that I've heard about circulating both in Chaucer and in Bristolwood. Is this something that the people will have a vote on, or is it something that the board will vote on? I just want to make sure. I know we're heard tonight, but is there a way that we can actually vote towards the location of the final placement of the tower?
There won't be no vote from the public. It's up to the village board, and it's up to the school board, first of all, if they want to sell it or allow the village to purchase that property. If the school board does not, then we're just probably going to go to the industrial park, and it's still up to this village board. I mean, they haven't made a decision here. We had this public meeting because there was a bunch of questions, and we're just trying to get the information out because there was some misinformation out there. We want to get the full information out, and then the board can react to that. So that's what that's about.
Absolutely.
And if the petitions, just make sure you bring them to one of the next board meetings, so that way the board has those.
Yeah,
so.
Absolutely. I appreciate that. And,
sure.
I do think it's something that the people do, regardless of who's here tonight, kind of speaks to it. So I do urge that if there's a vote that we move to put it in the industrial park, I think it makes the most sense for the people. And so if the school board is here or listening, I also urge that would be taken into consideration as well. One other thing I wanted to mention was around the assessment. And while homes may not assess for less based on a water tower, it ultimately comes down to what people are drawn to aesthetically. And so that's not taken into consideration. The assessment maybe doesn't take that into consideration, but if you're a potential home buyer and you're coming to the community and you're seeing this massive thing in your backyard, you might be wondering, hey, maybe I can cut the cost of this home down lower, and you might have to take a pay decrease because they don't like seeing the water tower. Especially if you're trying to sell your home while it's being put up, I think that tells a different story too, right? People are not going to want to be buying a house, seeing this massive thing being put up in their backyard. If that's going to go up, they might be wondering what else is next? What else am I in store for if we're willing to zone next to residential with these massive structures? And then one other thing I wanted to ask about was just around the 500,000 gallon tower. What I've seen online is that they typically have multiple supports. Now, in the presentation, you did mention that it is a single pedestal.
Correct.
I just want to confirm that that is the actual option, and that the renderings look like what it would look like.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you for your time. I appreciate it.
Sorry, can you spell your last name for me?
Yeah, it's Knoll, Knoll.
Okay, you were 206-108 third place?
20610 83rd place.
Perfect, okay, thank you.
Thank you.
And I think when you come up and talk like that, and the more people that we have do that, to voice their opinions, it's easier for us to make a decision and figure out which way to go. So thanks. Thanks for everybody for coming also.
One of the other things, it's not in this, but, you had a page of the presentation, I'm not sure where, but
The date of that presentation.
Yes, December 13th.
December 13th.
one of the comparisons between the industrial site and the school site was still, potential to further improve school firefighting ability and build parallel backbone to Main Street, taking advantage of the existing 16-inch elevation in trains. And both of them, for the industrial site, were both still not looking good.
Yep.
And so is that an issue? I mean, are we overworking that issue by going through the industrial? Because the ability to firefighting ability at the school is, I think, one of my bigger concerns.
Yeah, so I'll get back into that. I apologize. I wish I memorized on which side of all these renderings that was. I think it was prior. And I'll just note there are 3 questions here in the chat. We see those and we'll get to those. All right, so the 2 images here kind of best speak to what you talk about. So it might be hard for some in the audience to see it, but there's a couple of red question marks around here. To be completely honest, when we see a school like this, usually there's, whether it's public or private, usually there's a water main that loops all around the school. Very common for larger churches and certainly required for commercial and industrial developments. You actually put a loop in all around the school. So the thing is, the school could put some loops in right now, but absent of doing this water main on 203rd, there's nothing to like really supply those mains. It would get better, but probably not to that 4,000 gallon plus kind of neighborhood. So, you know, if that is kind of up to the school, if they want more hydrants on their property to kind of surround the building where they could fight a fire from multiple angles, that would kind of be up to them. But what we're saying here is right now, you can see kind of this patchwork of different colors on US 45. Right now, there are 2 wells kind of on the north end of the system, and all that water kind of, the primary route is US 45, where it's a combination of 12-inch and 8-inch water mains. And the thing is, some of those water mains are leaky. So in addition to helping out the fire protection situation for the school here, it also starts to build a network of strong water mains kind of parallel to the mains on US 45, so that you know, you wouldn't have to do a major relay of all those water mains when the time comes. Maybe you could simply line those water mains instead, or something of that nature. And then this also, you know, right now, the image on the top shows the existing water mains. If the school wanted to run a loop around their property, they'd be tapping off at 6-inch water mains on one side. There's kind of this, excuse me, here, you know, not as well tied in water mains over to the west, but if the school were planning to put this water main on 203rd anyways, by now you've got option of this really strong water main that they could tie off of. And that was what I was kind of driving at in that December 13th presentation.
If the tower goes into the industrial park, is adding this water main that would give them, I mean, are they able to add that water main up?
Yeah, so good question. If we did the water tower at the industrial site, you know, the school property still looks like this and the water mains around it are still looking like this. We would still, knowing what we know now, basically what we discovered, continuing to look into this site, we would definitely in our report recommend separately that these water mains go in to the school. And that's what we're driving at elsewhere in this presentation of like, hey, if that's what's needed to get the level of fire protection here from 1,900 gallons per minute to over that 3,500 kind of target, you know, we're going to recommend those go in, and then it's kind of up to the village or to talk with the school board of, hey, do they want to include those water mains in their referendum? Does the school want a special assessment, or sorry, the village want a special assessment? We haven't gotten far enough down that road yet, and as I think hopefully everyone's hearing, we're kind of at like a crossroads, right? It's hard to answer some of these questions right now of what would that look like versus what would the other look like. We could look into those things more, but I think at the end of the day, it's direction on whether or not this site is kind of still, if we had direction from the board to continue to pursue it. And then as Randy said, if the school board is willing to transfer that property or not.
Can I speak?
If I may, Chair, could I go through the questions of the folks in that put it in the chat that are online?
We'll come back to you.
Since we're on this slide, can I ask a quick question? Sure. Since you're here? Okay, we had talked about in one of the questions I had of extending that across, either across or under 45 to an industrial park. Okay, could we not, because Chaucer is on the south side of AH, could we not, and they have 16-inch pipes, right?
Chaucer, I believe, is just 8-inch.
Really?
And that's common for residential areas.
But I'm surprised because Chaucer was built after Bristol, and I thought Bristol had the 16.
Just one through it.
So the trick is, I know this figure doesn't show the water mains, but the trick is all on AH, there's 16, and then there's 8 that loops through. And there's no real option to, you know, thread the needle and get between a couple houses with a new water main or anything like that. So this water main starts and ends on a 16-inch water main. And once the tower is online, these, I can't tell you offhand, but I know this area is going to have like over 2,500 gallons per minute of fire capacity available. And that's with their 8-inch mains. And that's more than ISO would be targeting.
So depending on where that 16 is on the west side of AH, should that not be taken across AH north on just the school property and not go down 203rd? Take it to school?
So let me show you on this figure what the plan would be. So if the tower ended up in the school site, which would kind of be, I'm sorry, at the industrial site, which would be kind of off the page over here, there would be a large diameter water main that came down this street.
Right.
It would go under 45.
Right.
It would probably follow the path of the sidewalk, to be quite honest with you.
Okay.
It would get to the other side of AH where the 16-inch water main is, and it would tie in right there.
That's what I was wondering.
Yep.
So that would solve the problem of the water at the school, if you just connected it up.
Well, so it doesn't solve entirely or it really doesn't, that in and of itself does not improve the situation at the school.
So we couldn't connect off of that 16 on AH, go up the grassy section instead of going down 200?
Yes, you could. I'm just saying that's all costs above and beyond what we put in our cost opinion for the industrial site.
That was a possibility to do that.
Sure, yep.
Because it'd be closer to take it from 45 down to right there where Chaucer is, where we're looking to put the tower. And dig there all the way to the school with the larger pipe, right?
Sure. And the question at that point is, if we receive direction from the board, okay, scrap the school site, do the industrial site, then it's a whole separate issue as to whether or not the school board wants to go after the problem with the low fire flow on their property. What's that?
Should they be forced to?
You know, that's a good question. Just talking hypothetically here, you know, if the utility decided to put it in, they could special assess it, right? There would be a whole public hearing process. I have no idea what the history between the village and the school board is. Hopefully it's more friendly than that, but you know, presumably if it goes to the industrial site, then the village and the school are gonna have a sit down and say, here's the problem, what do you want to do about it? And we'll see where that goes.
Do they incur liability if they choose not to do anything?
I have no idea.
Okay.
I don't think you can force them to sell that land unless you claim eminent domain.
No, if they don't want to operate their water service.
Well, yeah.
Could they have no liability on that?
That'd be up to the school board's decision.
Well, it'd be up to a lawsuit if something bad were to happen.
Yeah, that's true too.
Ben, you want to go ahead with the second question?
Sure. Thanks everybody online for hanging tight here and being patient. And just for the record here, we've probably got about 8 folks joined online. The first question comes from Josie S. And I apologize, this is a little bit clunky. I know folks in the room are required to give their name and address. You know, I guess if you wanted to type that into the chat, we would read it. First question, why is it mid-February and we're just addressing the maintenance of the existing tank now? Why haven't we not addressed that part before now? So we talked about the reasons why the maintenance was deferred in the first place. When the DNR did their field evaluation of the system in 2020, quite honestly, Randy reached out to us, you know, pretty shortly after getting this notice from DNR that they have to do something, told us to get to work. I know it's a little bit cliche, but the speed of government works, you know, get authorized at a board meeting. We go, we do some study, we come back, we say, here's what we found, board, what would you like to do? Okay, agency, this is what us and the board have come up with. Agency, what do you think? Okay, we'll go look at some of those things. Okay, board, here's what we heard from the agency. You know, you get the picture. So I get it, that time has slipped, and certainly our original schedule has slipped quite a bit, but that's not to say that the village hasn't been working on this issue this whole time. Next question comes from Danielle. Will the DNR allow the use of wetlands to build? Are they protected? For all practical purposes, no, the DNR will not use the wetlands to build. Yes, they are protected. Now, is there a way to make that happen? Yes, sure, there is. It's a lot more expensive. You have to either then buy wetland credits from DNR, or you have to build a new wetland somewhere else in order to accomplish that. So, you know, just kind of civil and environmental engineering practices, we tried to avoid that if at all possible. Right, and we were not planning on it. Next question comes from Connor Healy. Regardless of where the water tower is placed, won't the age mains need to be replaced in the near future anyways, thus making the location at the school irrelevant? If you end up replacing that portion of infrastructure in the near future, it would make sense to keep industrial features in the industrial park. I encourage you not to do this on school grounds. Her address is 8211 201st. That's kind of in line with some other comments that we've had here tonight. That point in the near future of those industrial park mains would be 10 to 20 years, ballpark. Josie S., her address for the clerk here, 20503 84th Circle. And I'm just checking one more time if anyone in the chat has a question. That's all. So I'll turn it back to you.
Okay, there were a couple other people over here that wanted to speak.
Caroline asked the same question I was going to ask.
506 Chester Circle, east. So I'm sure the construction, whoever this gets bid out to is gonna do a fine job, but, you know, construction is what it is. And in the event something happens, who, you know, and the road, the pipes break, or the road, you know, the road gets flooded, or whatever might happen, you know, I mean, things do happen. And again, it's right in our backyard. So how do we know if this affects homeowner insurance? And has there ever been a situation where there has been something false, some water main break, and somebody's house gets flooded? Because I can tell you, they haven't prepped the land in the subdivision that we're in. There's a lot of houses that are still getting, you know, still having drainage issues.
Sure.
And with that water tower being right there, I can just imagine that if something goes wrong, nobody's gonna look out for us.
Yeah, sure. I'm going to answer that in two parts, and I'll work it in reverse order. So first, on the flooding, no matter where the water tower ends up getting placed, we're going to make water main improvements so that it can get anywhere in the system very quickly. Therefore, I know it's a little bit counterintuitive, but for all practical purposes, if there was an uncontrollable main break, you know, way up on the north end by the county grounds, they wouldn't be able to control it any better or worse than they would if it was right next to the water tower, because the way that we're designing the system is so that water from the water tower can get anywhere that it's needed in the system. But to that point, they do install, I think it's at least every 400 feet. It might be more frequently than that. And certainly at every intersection, there's valves on the water main. So if there is a break, the first thing that's going to happen is the contractor is going to notify the utility. The utility has a 24/7 emergency kind of response deal set up, and they'll be out there. Trent, what's your response time on something like that if a main were to break in the middle of the night?
Be there in less than 10 minutes.
There you go, to shut off the water main. Now, the other part of your question was during construction, what's the risk, who's responsible, what's happened before. So the contractor puts up construction bonds, and if they cause damage, they're responsible for taking care of it. Now, as far as what am I personally aware of what damage has actually happened, it comes during painting, and it comes when the contractor doesn't use that curtain, and they're painting and there's a real high wind. This paint dries really, really quickly, but if there are cars parked close to it, there have been instances of what they call dry fall, where that paint, because they're spraying it on, the first couple coats they spray on, the last coat they roll on, drips come and they'll fall on a car, and they'll pay to detail a car or whatever. But again, that's all within the contractor's realm of what they can control. I'm just going to go out on a limb and say, you know, probably 1 out of 10 water tower projects has some type of claim associated with it. And when it is a claim, it's usually either dust or paint on a car that was parked close by.
Okay, is there a telephone electric pole right there on the house on the corner there? Isn't there a utility?
There is, yeah.
So what happened? So how do you get through all that? I mean, are you?
So the power company has to temporarily relocate their service during construction, and they'll consider whether or not to bury it.
Well, thank you for your time. A good presentation, and please, industrial park. We don't have this in our.
Anybody else wishing to speak?
Excuse me, Lauren Zimmer, 8232 203rd. So I think it's like the second picture, that
Sure.
T view, is the view from my house. I didn't actually plan on speaking tonight because I was at the school board meeting that Randy presented this at, so I do know that as it currently sits, it sits in the school board's hands as far as the site being voted on. If you go back again, yep, that's it. Okay, so like my driveway is like 2 over from that. So, but if you could go a little earlier in the presentation.
Sure.
as far as like the fire protection,
Mhm.
I heard it addressed several times as the school's fire protection,
Sure.
but I think it's maybe one more. When I look at that for, again, all right, I'm missing it. It's the one where you're talking about how much firepower we have.
Sure.
Could you elaborate on like if my home catches on fire with how this currently sits? Because for that particular PSI for it, as I read it as somebody who doesn't know anything
Yep.
about this,
Sure.
it looks like they can fight my house's fire for 25 minutes. Is that correct?
It's not correct. So,
Okay.
but you ask a very reasonable question, and sometimes these things get lost on me
Sure.
because I'm so close to it. This is kind of like my daily life, right? I'm going to go back to, they rate these things based on
Besides the building and occupancy.
structure type
Okay.
and occupancy. So it's much higher for,
A residential home.
well, for something like the
Okay, so you
school.
need more for a building, but for
Correct.
a residential home, you would
So
have-
for your residential area, it's probably about 1,500, between 1,000
Okay.
gallons per minute and 1,500 gallons per minute,
Sure.
and for a duration of 2 hours.
Okay.
So even though I don't have this calculation here, we could take 100,000 gallons divided by 120 minutes if someone wanted to do that. But I can tell you right out of the gate that even with the village's largest well out of service, there's still about 880 gallons per minute that the remaining 2 wells can put into the system
Okay.
at the same time. And then you would have another, ironically, probably about 830 gallons per minute that could come from the tower. So that satisfies that 1,500 gallons per minute for 2 hours.
Okay.
So you're okay.
Okay, so say then the school opts to not, okay, and my understanding when I was at that meeting was that the board was presenting for the school to donate the land in turn for that main upgrade. Was that correct?
Yeah.
Okay, so that $250,000, they were gonna absorb that cost from the school having to do that. Later on in the presentation, you said that there's potentially a second one that needs to happen?
Yep, correct.
Okay, so even say at this point, the school donates the land, the village absorbs that $250,000 cost. There still is a second one that would need to go in by the school, and the school has the option to upgrade or not upgrade that lies within them.
Yeah, and just, you're on it, you're
Right.
correct. I struggle to answer because we haven't gotten into
Sure.
those talks with the school board and the fire department to say,
But upgrading that main, as somebody who lives right there,
Sure.
would be a benefit if there was a fire, because the fire department could tie into that?
do you live somewhere that's shown in this map?
I do.
Or relative
so
to
if
this,
you-
would you be
Yes.
north?
No, okay, so if you are, that T intersection that you pulled up before, up a little bit north, so it's running left, right?
Yeah.
No, I'm not in Bristol one, I'm north of Bristol one.
Oh, okay,
So come down south, yep, there you go.
okay, there.
Like literally that T on the
Okay.
second house.
Thank you.
You're good.
So this extra water main
Yes,
provides little extra benefit to you. Where you're gonna get the benefit is if this water main doesn't exist,
okay,
you get this missing link as part of the water tower project, you get this missing link right here. So instead of the water having to go around
the system,
the long way to get to your house, and through 8-inch mains, it goes straight up through 12-inch mains.
okay, and then at the industrial site, that upgrade then still lies within the school board?
Correct. Yeah, if we go to the industrial site, the village is not
They're not
planning to
absorbing
do
that cost?
this. Yeah, correct.
Okay, thank you for your time.
Yes.
All right. I think we're going to close the discussion on this item for now.
Can I ask one more question?
Okay.
Next round, last one. Chief, under the circumstances, if you had any doubt, like in this area, that you would not have enough water, would you take the tanker? Have you ever taken the tanker?
We would, yeah.
You would?
We would use alternate methods to bring in water if we need it. Correct.
You use my pond if you could run the hose off over there. Okay, I was just curious, I thought so, thank you, that's it.
All right, thank you all for your input. Ranger, do you want to just briefly talk about what?
Well, I will probably contact Jack Musha from the school to see when the next school board meeting might be. And then find out if they want to put that on the agenda, if it's not too late. What's that?
It's already on it. I posted it today. It's on it for Wednesday.
Oh, it's on the school board agenda? Okay. So then it's up to the school board if they want to make a decision or not. And when I was there, when I made the presentation, I just said, hey, we just need to make we just need to know if you're going to be able to move forward because we have to keep going no matter what. So it's not one side, it's the other, so.
Did the audience hear that? That the school board's, just check.
All right, I think that's it then on this issue, so we will continue with the agenda.